This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Franny's Pharmacy.
Now more than ever, it's important that our society focuses more on our mental and physical health. At Franny's Pharmacy, the team is committed to their community's need of being happy, healthy, and stress-free. Come learn how Franny's Pharmacy can assist you in a clean, professional environment with their expert bud tenders that are excited to educate you about the benefits of their lab-tested, DEA-certified CBD products. Franny's Pharmacy also offers wholesale and franchise opportunities. Visit their website at frannysPharmacy.com, and that's pharmacy with an F, and use the promo code CannaConnect10 for an exclusive Cannabinoid Connect discount. Again, that's Franny's Pharmacy with an F.com and use the promo code CannaConnect10 for an exclusive Cannabinoid Connect discount. Franny's Pharmacy, putting the farm back into pharmacy.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Canna Health.
Hey cannabis consumers, have you ever consumed a cannabis product thinking it'll make you feel a certain way, but then it doesn't? Don't you wish you had a clear understanding of your own DNA so that you could make informed decisions about what type of cannabis products interact best with your system? Well, now you can with EndoDNA. EndoDNA is a simple DNA test that maps your entire endocannabinoid system and then matches that summary with a specific cannabinoid ratio and terpene profile that best aligns with your unique genotype. Imagine being armed with personal information when visiting a dispensary. You'll have the knowledge and power and capability to purchase products that best align with your genotype. Visit their website to purchase the EndoDNA Collection Kit and Endo Decoded Report at endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. Again, that's endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. The future of cannabinoid therapeutics is here with EndoDNA. Hey George, how are you?
Good, Kevin. How are you?
I'm doing well. I got to tell you, I spent the week in New Mexico this last week, and I'm here in Dallas at home again. And they turned up the temperature. It was cool before, and it's 95 and above, and that's it. There's no turning back now.
That's right. I was in Napa Valley. Same thing. Seems like middle of a heat wave or the tail end of it right now. So you weren't alone.
So now it's definitely time to hit the pool or maybe travel somewhere with the beach, or I don't know. We're gonna have to figure something out. But my golf days are gonna get hotter. That's for sure.
Yep.
Well, George, I'm excited to have you on today. You're the co-founder and CEO of Bespoke Financial. But I know that you have vast experience in the financial industry, specifically focused in asset-based lending. So let's start with kind of your background. Talk to us about, where you were before cannabis and what led you to the cannabis industry.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to do it. And thanks again for having me on. My background, I grew up in New York, worked in finance on Wall Street directly out of school. Right after I graduated from NYU, I worked at Goldman Sachs for 3 years, left there to go join the buy side of the industry, working at Guggenheim Partners Investment Management. And the majority of my time, I spent 11 years in my previous career before co-founding Bespoke. And like you mentioned, my focus was on asset-based lending. So this is lending to, obviously more established companies outside of cannabis that needed unique lending solutions or just term debt. And so my time wearing a bunch of hats in the 10 years that I was in that career, I basically got into a real, I'd say, experience looking at underlying assets, looking at collateral, structuring deals that made sense, that were attractive for the lender, worked for the borrower, and really funky situations. There's the liquid space of lending and debt capital markets, which is, cookie cutter. These are companies that are very safe credits. They have a very set process of accessing funds in the market. But I tended to focus on the illiquid side. So these are one-off opportunities, typically not rinse and repeat deal structures. So it got me involved and exposed to looking at a variety of different deal types. The transition to cannabis, I'd say, took a couple years. In 2013, I moved out to LA. And so that was my first exposure to being in any state where there was some form of a legal cannabis market. Obviously, back then it was medicinal.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it caught my attention, caught my eye. I myself am a late, I'd say, consumer or late entrant to the cannabis market. Didn't really dabble in it too much before I was 25. But
Let's talk about that real quick, George. I'm just
sure,
curious. So, like,
sure.
I mean, what was your experience first trying it if you hadn't consumed it before?
I will say I had tried it maybe once in high school, once in college. Hope my parents aren't listening to this, but both times it was sort of a non-starter. I mean, it didn't really go anywhere. Wasn't really a fit for me, and it was more so just not my cup of tea. I couldn't tell you why at 25 I decided to give it another shot. I just know that I did. It was my 25th birthday, and we're going snowboarding, and I found one. I responded to it really, really well, especially relative to alcohol or anything like that, which is socially acceptable. I just found it worked really well for me. I'd say the more compelling reason for me to really be a believer in the space is after moving to LA. I'd come back to New York, and I have family members that are dealing with chronic pain. Some that were going through chemo, and at that time, you're really only focused about getting relief to people that you care about. And so I'd bring back, these tablets, these tinctures, and just saw the positive reception, and really the improvement in the quality of life that this could bring to a lot of people. And don't get me wrong, I love cannabis, but there's actually, I think, a very compelling need. And these are my family members, my friends. These are people that wouldn't consider cannabis just because it was illegal, right?
Right.
Just because of the stigma that was attached to it. And so this idea of bringing that market out of the prohibition era, bringing it into the legal space, and educating consumers as to what is this product actually and what is the impact it can have on them. That, coupled with the fact that I think the war on drugs has just been a giant waste of resources. It's done more harm than it has good. And at the end of the day, I am a big believer in individuals having the ability to really take ownership of their life and do what they want. And so there's a multitude of factors that really got me excited, especially when recreational turned on in California in 2018. I looked at this as, a game-changing event, something that could help undo a lot of harms that I saw in society. And it was just a very exciting opportunity for me at that time in my career to get into something where it was more dynamic, less structured, moving out of the corporate world and into something that's far more exciting. And so in 2018, I just made the decision, I could see my career 10 years forward in the finance seat, and it looked very similar to the career that I had at that time. Or I could, really just embrace the fact that I was still young and take advantage of this very rare opportunity to get involved with an industry in day one, as it was just starting to get built out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so let's talk about that. Let's dive in there. So what were some of with your 14-year experience in the financial industry, like what were some of those initial kind of like, whoa, here's an opportunity. Here's where we can really add value to the industry.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I'd say part of it, purely from the analytical side of my brain, looking at these less liquid, off the run lending opportunities for the period of time that I had looked at, it highlighted a couple macro trends for me. One, first movers into those situations as a lender, you tend to be able to structure deals that are really attractive for you, both in terms of, hey, this will give you a much higher return than you can find anywhere else in the market. And you can also structure deals that are safer for you. You can just ask for more covenants and more terms from the borrower. So it's really attractive in the beginning. And then as other investors start seeing this investment pan out, you see more money coming into the space, your returns start to decrease, the market gets more stable, and you might see more deals getting done on a dollar basis, but lower returns and lower yields. So one, it highlighted this kind of cyclical, hey, if you're the first mover in the space, that's typically the most attractive time to enter into the market. Two, it obviously allows you to build up an expertise in the space, right? Just having a track record, having the ability to say, this is an industry we've focused on for the number of years that we've been working on this, been 4 years now over at Bespoke. All of that adds to credibility. But really, from looking at the industry itself, if anyone remembers 2017 and 2018, the vast majority of capital that cannabis companies could access came from equity investors, right? There were a handful of VCs that were putting money into the space, but the vast majority were going to friends and family and really just trying to bootstrap their businesses from the top. And company valuations really just started skyrocketing because California turned on, the next couple states turned on, Colorado, Washington, Oregon. These are markets that had already existed. investors in their head just thought, okay, it's a question of months, maybe a year until there's federal legalization. And when that happens, all these companies are going to be worth, 5 to 10x versus what I'm investing at right now. And so you just saw a real frothy buildup in equity investors throwing money at these companies at valuations that, from a step back, you could say this is an unsustainable trend. Things just don't go in one direction. And so when I looked at the space, what I saw was there's a huge potential market size, there's a huge market fit, there's a lot of equity capital that may dry up. The one thing I didn't see was financing options that were non-dilutive, debt financing to be specific. And so, my thesis was in 5 to 10 years, cannabis is going to be at the size and scale of any other CPG industry. And people compare it to alcohol, people compare it to tobacco, pharmaceuticals. But if you look at alcohol, tobacco, pharmaceuticals, those companies that operate in that space are very reliant on debt financing. They have an option, they have a way to raise that money. Cannabis didn't. And so just given my background, given the fact that this was going to be, less liquid, less vanilla, less stereotypical of what you'd find in the debt financing markets, I just thought it was the right meeting of a lot of different factors. And, it really compelled me to take a shot and really see if we could be the first mover, define this market, define what the standards and terms would be for this space. And ultimately, the way I look at Bespoke, you have on one side investors sitting with their capital, and then on the other side you have cannabis companies that are brand new, working in a new industry, really just scaling from the ground up. The federal regulation of this being an illegal product creates a divide in between those two pools. And so Bespoke is really the bridge in between, right? Leveraging our expertise, leveraging our track record, we're able to source more and more capital from the investors, provide it to the cannabis industry that does need it, allow them to flourish, allow them to thrive, and have that just be a very symbiotic partnership between us, both on the cannabis company side and on the investor side.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I appreciate that. There's a lot to dissect from there. I want to get into debt financing more and, various lending options in cannabis, and especially what Bespoke, brings to the table when it comes to those things.
Mm-hmm.
Before we do, let's step back and just talk about maybe what some of the challenges in securing financing in the cannabis currently are, or I guess were in the past until Bespoke has come around.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, the biggest challenge, I'd point to two big challenges. One is just, I'd say, regulatory based, right? The federal illegality, as much as you may be a licensed operator working in a state that's allowed for you to work in cannabis, the fact that it's illegal on a federal level means that the major banks won't touch you. So if you find a state chartered bank, if you find a credit union that'll work with you, you're going to have to pay significant costs in order to have that. Historically, any medicinal market worked mostly in cash. The consumer comes in, pays cash to the dispensary then pays their suppliers in cash, and it's a cash-based economy for the most part. And so when you have federal illegality and a huge cash component, those are two things that keep the vast majority of capital away from the space. Investors are like, one, I'm not going to risk my company or my portfolio going into something that's not completely above board. And two, how am I supposed to know that these companies' financials that I'm reviewing are actually real? Because it's cash. Cash can disappear at any given moment, right? How do I audit this? How do I have a degree of confidence in the operation? So one, it's really a result of like federal regulation as it sits right now, and all the flow through of issues that it creates for the industry and for investors. The second major blocking point is really on the cannabis company side themselves. The vast majority of cannabis companies right now, I'd say, fall within this small to mid-size bucket if you were to rank companies based off of size and scale. And so these are companies where, again, they've probably bootstrapped just from their own investments or from friends and family. They don't have a ton of employees. They don't have dedicated finance teams that are going out there looking under every rock to see what financing options are available for them. So from an internal, just, having the resources to devote to securing financing, I think these companies are definitely, operating lean. They haven't really seen the value of building out a finance team because there's not a ton of people that are tripping over themselves to provide financing. And that's something that's been about the same condition wise since Bespoke has started. Now, obviously, we've deployed over $500 million worth of capital over the past, 3 years or so. we're expected to do $1 billion in originations just this year alone. That is a small slice of the pie when you look at the overall size of the industry and how much activity is going on. So as much as we're helping and doing our best to really service this industry as much as possible, there's a huge swath of this industry where financing is just unattainable, or they're just not in a position or don't see the value in terms of getting into a position where they could go and see what's out there for them right now.
And that's due to state regulation, right? I mean,
It's the mismatch between the state and the federal level. It's a mismatch between investors. If any investor looks at any other market, they don't have to look at it on a state by state basis, right? In cannabis, you do. So it's not as though, hey, just go find the biggest operator and go lend to them. It's okay, well, what states are they operating in? What are their respective needs within that market? It's funny. We don't have one US cannabis market. We have about 35 different cannabis markets within the US, right? And all of that just adds
and you say 35
points.
because there's 35 medical states online, right? And then of course there's 19 adult use.
Yeah.
So you service everywhere where there's cannabis, and I would imagine within those given states, like you're saying, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
it's fine.
It's that the regulations differ, right? And
That's right.
You got to
That's
navigate
right.
through those.
The regulations are different. The economics of the business are different. A pound of flour in California versus a pound of flour in Michigan versus a pound of flour in New Jersey that just turned on. All vastly different markets and all vastly different economics that you have to consider. And all of this just compiles to add more friction points. And at the end of the day, investors are looking for minimizing risk, minimizing uncertainty, maximizing return. And this is just a very challenging industry for someone who doesn't have the experience that we do.
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk about, debt financing more, and maybe the other types of financing options that are available.
Sure. Yeah. I'd say right now, ever since 2019, when equity investors realized that, hey, federal legalization isn't right around the corner, the whole equity investor component of this market has really not been active to as large a degree. Obviously, there are existing investors that continue to support their own businesses, and on the margin, you'll see investors finding an attractive opportunity and getting involved. But that equity investor base has more or less shied away from the space en masse just until there's more clarity on that federal decriminalization timeline. If you look at debt financing, I'd say the most prevalent form of debt financing that's available for cannabis companies right now is in the commercial real estate space. So if you own the property that your factory is built on or operates under, you can go get financing without it being a materially hard ask. It's probably the most fleshed out. Again, you always have to look at both the borrower side and the lender side. The lender side, they're like, hey, I understand how to value properties, and I understand there may be a slight premium here on this property because there's a cannabis license attached to it. So it's very comfortable. It's very easy for them to get comfortable with the risk in that situation and deploy funds. Problem is, I'd say vast majority of cannabis companies don't actually own the property that they're operating under. It's a lease, or they just might be in multiple locations. So it's very inefficient for them to invest in buying property in every new market that they branch out into. So as much as that's a viable path, it's not a one solution that really addresses everyone's concerns. After that, there's a huge drop off, right? For us in particular, Bespoke, we like to focus on companies that have already been operating for some time. So we're not targeting pre-revenue companies, and we're not targeting startups. What we are focused on is identifying companies where they themselves have an understanding of their own business, of the margins, of what their opportunity is that they're working towards, which we can actually underwrite. We can take a look and see, okay, are these guys actually executing on the vision that they've set out for themselves? And also understand the management teams that are behind it. There's been lots of shocks to the industry, right? If you think back to Vapegate, COVID was a huge, obviously stressful for everyone, but also cannabis as well. The flower prices coming in significantly lower last year. There's been a decent amount of these episodes that shake out the weak hands in the cannabis space. And so what we found is the companies that survive are the ones with these cohesive management teams that are really focused on execution when it comes to their vision and their game plan. And so for us, we want to find a company where we can get a handle on the business, get a good degree of confidence on the management team, and identify opportunities where, if you have a manufacturer who's buying flower, packaging the goods and selling it to a dispensary, they have to pay their suppliers first, and then they have to wait to collect a payment from their dispensary. The dispensary may not pay them until the inventory is sold off of their shelves. And so you have your capital, you as the manufacturer, just tied up waiting for payments to come in so you could go buy more raw materials and start the cycle. We try to identify companies like that, where if we come in with the capital, they're in a position to really grow their business, both from a top line revenue perspective and improving profitability by taking advantage of economies of scale. And so what we focus on are those types of existing businesses where our capital can be a significant game changer in the near term. There's obviously other types of financing that companies are interested in, whether it's like, hey, I need a 7-year loan so that I could go buy a new property, or I want to go buy new equipment. And all of those are definitely use cases that we tackle on a case by case basis. But for the most part, our immediate focus and our core focus has been on identifying these companies where their working capital is their limiting factor. And if we were to ease that burden for them, they just have tremendous more opportunity that they could take advantage of. So that's really our core key demographic that we go after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah. So it sounds like you're just looking really for established companies that have proven their value, right? With numbers on hand to kind of show that they've met certain goals, or if they are able to attain future goals.
Yep.
And
and I would also add, when established is, yes, up and running, they're not pre-revenue, there is an actual business here. But a really, I'd say very compelling reason why we've had a tremendous amount of success is that we grow with our clients. And so we've had tremendous success stories where we started working with companies where they might have been doing 10 million in annual revenue. Fast forward a year, fast forward 2 years, these guys are north of $100 million right now, just because they actually have been able to capitalize on that opportunity. So I wouldn't necessarily say established as in being in their final form, but really are operating, right? And they have a good sense of where they can be if they did have access to additional funds and additional resources.
Right. No, yeah, thanks for clarifying. That's what I meant. I mean, I didn't mean, what I meant to say is not a non-startup, non-bootstrapper,
Correct.
like, right, operational, revenue generating, right? Yep. And so what does that process look like? I mean, you mentioned identify, right? So it sounds like you're going out and seeking these companies. I mean, I'm sure some come knocking on your door, but
yep.
What does that vetting process look like? What does the whole process look like? How intimate is it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we try to, it really depends on the company that's approaching us, right? So for a earlier stage single license operator, obviously there's just less for us to untangle in terms of trying to understand their business. But we also work with, multi-state operators that have vertical integration in each market that they operate in. And so depending on the complexity of the business, that can dictate really how much we need to, work with the management team to make sure we're understanding their numbers and understanding the story. But we have 5 financing products that we go to the market with right now. If you look at our client base, it spans the entire supply chain, from cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, brands, and dispensaries, and then even ancillary companies that are focused on the cannabis space. And so we are, I'd say, as low touch as we can be. Oftentimes what we'll find is that because these companies haven't gone down a financing road with a true third-party capital provider before, there's a consultative approach that we have to take sometimes, whether it's guidance of, okay, you really should be tracking your financials, or if you're not in a position to add a CFO or VP of finance, there are a lot of outsourced solutions that you can work with, and companies that we've worked with and had good success with, where we can actually point them in the right direction, where they then have to do a little bit of reconciliation, get up to speed, get their books closed, and then we're in a position to really just go. We've definitely had a whole host of conversations like that, but we've also had a lot where people come in and they've scaled their business responsibly. They've really made it a point to really have that discipline to make sure that they are tracking how their business goes. And I tell any cannabis operator or any business owner, really, it's just, if you in a leadership position want to be effective, you have to have a lay of the land. And it's not fun. No one enjoys it, closing books, tracking down receipts, making sure everything's accounted for. But if you don't do that, you do yourself a huge disservice. You're closing doors, and you're really not allowing the success of your business to be illustrate it in a way that any lender or capital provider would want to see it so they can understand what you've managed to achieve.
Yeah, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're gonna end up having to do it anyway
Exactly.
if you're gonna need that funding, right?
Yeah.
So
And the later you wait, the more painful it'll be. So just rip off the band-aid now and get ahead of it is always our advice.
yeah, that's so true. The more you wait, the more information, more money coming in, more receipts, more data to collect, right? I mean,
And you got to remember what happened 3 months ago. And it's just like, oh, I had a phone call about this, but I didn't take any notes. And it's just, the more you can minimize that, the better everyone will be in the long run.
absolutely. Yeah, that just gives me a nightmare just thinking about it.
Yeah.
George, what haven't we talked about that we should talk about and the audience should be aware of?
I mean, there's one, the exciting thing about the cannabis industry is that I don't think if you look at established markets like, a California, Colorado, where this market's been around for a number of years, you're still seeing growth that any other industry would be jealous of. Like California, Colorado, retail sales, even in 2021, clocked up 20% year over year, possibly more. And then you have new markets and new states that are turning on. And obviously,
New Mexico just generated what 10 million in its first 2 weeks or something
yeah,
like that. I think it was 20 million in the first month.
yep,
Don't quote me on that exact number, but I believe that's what the Cannabis Control Division Board said. But
I believe
anyway,
it.
yeah, it's
No,
crazy.
and states like New Jersey, right? This is like the most densely populated state in the US. It's in the tri-state area, and them turning on adult use recreation, I don't even think it's been a month, quite honestly, of it running, but you already see anecdotally lines around the block at dispensaries. There's huge pent-up demand, and that's just from existing consumers of cannabis. If you look, a couple years down the line, again, when the stigma of federal illegality is removed, there's huge, tremendous growth potential, right? And then different ways for us to use the plant, because not everyone's looking for a psychoactive high. Some people do just want the benefits improving their quality of life. And there's just been, I think, not enough research done into how can these various components that are in the plant be tailored and really designed to address specific use cases across the consumers that exist there. There's going to be a huge flock of new entrants into the space is like the end result. And so it's very exciting. In the backdrop of today's economy and today's markets, there's a lot of volatility, there's a lot of uncertainty about the future and what the consumer is going to do. I think cannabis really just does stand out, especially in periods like this where it's something where they say there are two things you want to invest in when you go into a recession, right? It's alcohol and tobacco. And I'm not saying we're going into a recession, but whether it's good times or bad times, this is a product that I think makes a very compelling case to be a staple when it comes to how consumers spend their money. And at the end of the day, it's fun. It's just a fun, you meet a lot of dynamic characters. These are people that have really had to fight with both hands tied behind their back to even get their businesses where they are right now. And it's just very inspiring to really work with these operators and communicate with them and really just do our part to really facilitate their growth. It's just, I really do feel blessed that everything lined up where we could start Bespoke and be at this unique time and place where it's just everything's growing, it's nascent, and there's just a long road ahead of us.
Yeah. You said so much there that excites me, man. Like, the one is like you touched on earlier about how there's certain catalysts or events that have shocked the industry. And it's COVID was one, right?
Yep.
Because it was a time where there were lockdowns, the use of alcohol went up, but also cannabis, right? And
Yep.
sales of cannabis.
Yep.
Um, and then you talk about the potential of recession. I'll say it. I think we are headed to recession. Regardless, it's not good right now.
Mm-hmm.
But this could be another catalyst, right? Where
Yep.
people are, so there's something that to take a factor. But having hear you talk about, all the potential and the new entrants that could come in, it's amazing. And then what blows my mind, George, is when I think about the potential of industrial hemp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're talking about the adult use, the recreation, the medical, right, which is super important. And that's booming. That's projected to be what, $100 billion industry or something like that.
Yeah, At least. It
At
depends
least,
on the
right?
timeline you're looking at, but yeah.
Right. And can you imagine once this country like figures out and starts to invest in infrastructure for processing hemp, right? Like
Mhm.
separating the hemp from the fiber in the herd so that we can start to make industrial goods, houses, cars made out of hemp plastics. I mean, that blows my mind because that
It's
then truly says there's no waste to the plant. And
that's
that's
right.
it's insane.
No, I mean it's huge amounts of untapped potential across the board. Um, Looking at us as a fintech company that's servicing the space, what I think is very exciting about Bespoke is that, if you think about a normal fintech company, they're coming into an industry that's already existed and operated for decades, right? Whether it's like, consumer lending, trying to take the place of credit cards, and then, neobanks that are coming to be a more viable option for banking. There's a status quo, and they're coming in and saying, we can either do this better, more effectively, or we can service a huge untapped part of the market. And part of the struggle for those companies is getting people to unlearn the way things have been done and transition into the new model. With cannabis, because you're starting, when we're starting in this era, you don't have to fight the status quo, right? And you don't have to wait for advancements. And that's something that we've really pressed on even at Bespoke. It's how do we take advantage of the technology, the data, the systems that exist already and bring modern solutions without having to go down the path of, okay, let's reinvent the wheel, let's do everything manually, and then down the road we'll automate and we'll try to get everyone convinced that this is a better way to do it. We can instead just come in and say, hey, there's a lot of exciting ideas that are out there when it comes to fintech. None of them are looking at cannabis just because it's federally illegal. Which one of these are actually impactful and going to be very relevant for the industry themselves, and how can we be the ones that bring it into the industry? And there's a huge amount of potential just from that. But I think that's where it's really compelling as an entrepreneur, as someone who's trying to set up a business that enables growth in this industry. Just having an open playing field where really it's up to the viability of our ideas and our services, and what we actually manage to execute on. It's very, very exciting and very compelling. And I think, it's almost a blessing in disguise. I know it may not feel that way for anyone who's dealing with, armored car pickups and cash deployments, but, on a much grander scale or much bigger picture, I think it's a very exciting point for companies like Bespoke to come in and really just say, hey, we're not going to force you to go to the 19th century and then slowly progress up. We can just start with status quo and really begin with, what are the easiest solutions that take advantage of the technology that we have even today.
Right, right. Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. There's a huge benefit to the cannabis operator because it's an option that's not readily available to them, right? Due to the
Yep.
federal illegality. And you touched on the armored vehicles and the cash businesses, and I have to touch on safe banking, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that bill, I think Morgan Davis put it the best. It's the chew toy of the cannabis industry, right? Like,
Yes. I'd say
and
more of DC than the cannabis industry, but yes, your point stands.
so I mean, it's just funny, right? Like, we don't know what's going to happen with that. It's obviously needed when it passes, whether it's a standalone bill or it's combined with something else. Where does that put Bespoke? What does
Yeah.
that change your model at all? I mean,
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one we get a lot. So from day one, our thesis had been ultimately debt financing will exist in this space. Ultimately, federal regulation will conform with state regulation, and institutional capital, investors, financial institutions will look at this as just any other CPG market that they could deploy funds into. So for us, it's always been a question of when, not an if, right? The whole idea behind this company was to be a first mover and establish our expertise and our network and our brand name. So our thesis, and this is something that we do update, probably on a quarterly basis, try to refresh and see if anything's materially changed, has been that there's so much going on in the world right now that there isn't enough dedicated political attention being focused on the cannabis industry, which is kind of shocking if you look at what each state treasury that has an adult
I
use
know, right?
cannabis market says
It's
about
crazy.
what it's done to their revenues, programs they can fund. It's pretty shocking that on the federal level, there's not enough of a momentum to see one of these bills pass through across the finish line. Our base case assumption right now is that we probably are not going to be at a point where there's enough political momentum before 2024. We think the next presidential cycle offers the most viable shot, just because, again, it's a great tentpole issue for Democrats and for some Republicans that are just pro-business, that want to see, a new market thrive, that aren't stuck in the ideology of, cannabis being a gateway drug, or any of that stigma from the prohibition era. So we think that's probably the most opportune time that you'll see enough galvanizing of these political resources, and people actually trying to get something across the finish line. That being said, something like safe banking, that's such a limited use, can get, a lot of the problems solved for the cannabis industry immediately. Will you see passage on that before 2022? I mean, we're talking about a year and a half. Maybe it's possible. We don't think it's very likely. But even once these measures are adopted and pass the House and then pass the Senate and then get signed by the president, none of these are actually cure-all bills, right? What they really do is they say, okay, we're setting up a timeline for us to finalize actual rules. So safe banking doesn't actually say, hey, Wells Fargo, you can go work with cannabis companies tomorrow. If safe banking is passed, it sets up a 6-month window for the regulators to come up with rules that Wells Fargo can then follow to service the cannabis industry. Will they finalize that in 6 months? I think that's very unlikely, just given how long it's safe banking has been kicked around. And then once the rules are finalized, then Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Bank of America, all these financial institutions then have to have their compliance departments up to speed on the rules, have internal controls in place, and then they can actually reach out and actually start servicing the industry. So start to finish, even after the bill passes, it's probably 1 to 2 years before the cannabis industry actually starts to see any benefit from that. So for us, it's not looking like anything is going to change in the immediate term. You're still probably 2 to 3 years away from anything that's super impactful. That being said, it's always hard to forecast political change, right? And so, things could flip in the immediate. Rising noise, the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen talking about how safe banking's inability to pass is just a huge glaring issue. The IRS's issues actually being able to collect on federal taxes because of 280E and because of the federal ambiguity. There's a growing cohort of voices on the federal level that are saying, this is getting a little ridiculous now at this point. We need some clarity and some guidance, and the industry would benefit from all of that. But again, I just think in the grand scheme of things, cannabis is just one item on the agenda for these politicians. And so I'm not too optimistic that we'll see something before the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, you make you make a lot of great points, and I like how you broke out that timeline of when safe banking passes, if it does, in the next, just the whole rollout of it, right?
Yep.
Of it actually be implemented, excuse me. And that's helpful because on Twitter and within the industry a lot, the question comes up, well, when is it going to be federally legal, right? When is it going to be federally legal? Well, if that's one particular aspect of cannabis reform, and we're looking at a year to 2 implementation just for safe banking, I mean, there's a lot of layers within cannabis legalization overall, right? You got social equity, you got social justice, you've got expungement of records, you've got so much.
I mean, there's also, what does federal legalization look like, right? Is it moved from a class 1 to a class 3? Is it totally off the controlled substances list? What are the federal rules going to be? Are they going to come in and try to thread the needle and have a framework that works with each state regulation? Or are they going to say, hey, this is a state's issue, we're just not going to consider it illegal? There's just so many factors that have to be figured out. And exactly like you said, I mean, the social equity should be a huge component of this overall discussion, right? There's a tremendous economic opportunity with legalizing cannabis. There's no reason why that economic benefit should not go to these communities that have been ravaged by the war on drugs. They've been, disproportionately, I'd say, enforced into issues when it comes to the war on drugs. And now that there's an opportunity, you can't forget that segment of society, right? That's just that's insult to injury when it comes to the idea of justice for citizens in the US. And so for me, I understand it. There's a lot of factors that have to get figured out. I'm not saying I'm the guy that comes in with a 82-point plan that fixes everything. But at the end of the day, you do still have an industry that's kind of stuck paying the price, right? And again, these operators that are just like, hey, I'm just trying to build a business that, is trying to do good and, accretive to tax revenue and economic opportunity for people in my community. And they just can't because, because there's no movement on anything, it seems, until everything can be solved at once. And that's usually like the worst way to go about solving problems.
Right, right. Of all the scenarios you laid out, I mean, I really hope that the government just removes it from the schedule and listing, leaves it up to the states. I mean,
Yeah.
like, take your federal tax on it or whatever and just stay out of it because you're already seeing it working at the state level. There's 18 states, right? Is it 18 or 19 at this
I think
point?
19 with
19,
adult use. Yeah.
19 adult use at this point, and all are different, and it's going to be interesting to see how they all play out and kind of what works and what doesn't, right? I mean, we know that New York's going to come online and they are restricting vertically integrated companies. That to
Yep.
me is interesting, right? I
Yep.
mean, that levels the bar of raises the bar of competition within that state, which I really am excited to see play out. And then you've got states like New Mexico that's just come online and they allow for 6 plant grow per household or per
Yep.
person,
Yep.
which is awesome. I mean, I got my dad that's thinking about doing spin door growing. So
Yeah.
it's just it's cool to see. And I mean, but of course, like you said, no one can predict when or how it's gonna happen. But it's important to have these conversations to really talk through them because one, it helps educate ourselves, helps us grow, helps the audience grow. But then we have ammunition, right? We have something to kind of take forward to our legislators to help educate them as they roll out these policies.
Yeah, and one thing I'd say is that you do see, for anyone who's following this space, you do see pretty creative solutions that, again, different localities are trying to implement to see what the best way is for them to roll out these cannabis programs. And so I know New York City just put out a request for proposal where they're trying to understand how can we structure our cannabis programs so that, again, the social equity component is given a fair shot to thrive. And social equity is something that, I don't think I've seen a state example that really is like, okay, here's the way to do it, where you actually get licenses issued, these business owners have enough resources to actually start the business and continue operating it. And so just seeing the creativity and solutions that would come through, seeing New York City in particular asking the industry, what are your thoughts on the best way to implement this? It's definitely something where you have to be thoughtful, you have to be mindful, because again, like that social equity component, left to its own devices, market forces will go towards the big guys and the established operators. And they have a role in the future state of the cannabis industry. There's always a Budweiser, there's always a Coors, there's always a Middle Light, but there's also a whole host of craft. When you're looking at brewing or alcohol, whatever market you're looking at, you just want to make sure that the big guys don't crowd out the little ones. And at the end of the day, the consumer benefits. They have a wide variety of choice. They have different, product tiers for whatever suits their best interest. And at the end of the day, everyone gets to participate in this economic, little opportunity that cannabis is offered.
George, that was beautifully said, man. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I'm gonna let you just mic drop it right with that. That was perfect. Where can people find y'all's website and social media if they want to learn more about Bespoke?
Yeah, so our website is bespokefinancial.com. The Instagram, which I'm not on as much as I should, we'll be sure to share that so you can have that handle up there. And we recently just started a Twitter handle where we just put out news on our companies, some of the companies that we interact with, and also news on the business itself. But yeah, I'd invite anyone who's interested in learning more, please do reach out through any one of these platforms. And, we'd be happy to either explore what our financing could do, just give you a status check on, sort of what our thoughts are in terms of, different ancillary services that may get you, even if you're not at the place right now for financing, building towards getting to that place. Because at the end of the day, like I said, we are seeing more interest from the investor community. There are more solutions, I'd say, that are available. And, ignoring the macroeconomic volatility that exists right now, we're going to be in a position where we can help any single operator that comes across our path in one way or the other. And so I would just invite people to start the conversation and learn more.
Yeah, definitely check it out. I will say, as we wrap up, George, that I was on your website and your guys' content marketing game is strong.
Oh, thank
Like,
you.
I mean, I was like Googling different kind of terminology, kind of just preparing for this podcast, and bespoke blog every time came up. So SEO game's on point, blog content looks good. You guys are doing all the right things. So
Yeah, well, we got to
um,
get out there, right? We want people to find us as easily as possible.
that's absolutely right, man. You guys are doing it the right way. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights, George. Love to have you back on again real soon. Okay.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks again, Kevin. It was great being here.
Absolutely. Yes. And thank you all for listening. Bye.